Now we can discuss the business cycle, which is the changes that GDP goes through over a period of time. It's an increase or decrease in the level of economic activity as measured by gross domestic product. These increases and decreases are referred to as the business cycle. There are 4 stages to the business cycle, so we'll draw one freehand. So in this example, we're going to put time on this axis, and we're going to put the amount of things we make that satisfy wants on this axis, which is gross domestic product. And the business cycle goes through 4 stages, and it looks like this. There's a peak in GDP, and that peak is the highest point in a business cycle, and it divides a period of growth from a period of recession. So recession is the next stage of the business cycle. And it's a period of decreasing GDP, and it needs to be for a period of 6 or more months. Now there's another definition of when we're in a recession, and that's whenever an organization called the National Bureau of Economic Research says so. But most reporters use a period of 6 months, which, since GDP is very hard to collect, it's only released every 3 months, which is a quarter. So you need 2 quarters consecutively of GDP downturns in order to be called a recession. But finally, the bad times come to an end, and you reach a trough, which is a bottom, the opposite of a peak. A period divides a period of declining GDP to a period of increasing GDP. And then finally, we have a recovery. Now, when you get sick, when you first get over your illness, it's called a recovery. But 6 months to a year afterwards, you don't call it a recovery. So initially, it can be called a recovery, but it's also called growth and expansion. Growth in GDP and expansion. Similarly, a very bad recession is called a depression. This is also referred to as a contraction in GDP. And then eventually the cycle repeats itself and there's another peak. This is what we want to do in macroeconomics. We want to be explaining what's happening to output, unemployment, and inflation. And our next 2 models, which will be the aggregate expense model and the aggregate demand model that we'll cover in later chapters, will do this. So at a peak, it's a period of time that is at a maximum. Unemployment will be at its lowest point. Employment will be at its highest point. And because the labor market is very tight, there may be an increase in the price of the factors of production, which will be passed along to consumers in the form of higher prices. So there may be some inflation. A recession is a period of declining GDP. And during this, factors of resources become unemployed. So unemployment will rise. Our model predicts that we should have deflation as a result, because wage rates may go down. But wage rates tend not to go down for a variety of reasons we'll discuss later. And as a result, prices, although our model predicts that prices will go down, prices are said to be sticky downward. They don't change downward. A trough is a period of time where the recession ends and a period of growth occurs. It's the lowest point compared to before and after. And it's the maximum level compared to, so unemployment will be at its lowest level here. Unemployment will be at its highest. And as the labor market gets tighter, as employment starts to grow, we may see a little deflation over here, but unlikely given today's economic conditions and structure. And so we'll have a period of growth here, which then may be matched with rising employment, lowering unemployment, and then possibly inflation at the peak, towards the peak. All right, so there's your 4 stages of the business cycle. Now, causes of the business cycle. Causes of the business cycle are basically, it can be a downward spiral. If spending decreases by the expense approach of GDP, businesses will produce less because it's not selling and lay off workers, and then there'll be less income, and there's a downward spiral. If for some reason spending increases, then business will respond to that by hiring more workers to increase output to satisfy that demand, and then there'll be an upward spiral. What causes these cycles can be external or internal to economics. External are like innovations. So the dot-com era in the 90s, for example, those innovations in computers and electronics led to a great increase in productivity and investment, which led to growth. Political stability is very good for growth. So the United States has been very secure domestically, and it's been a good place to grow. But if you look at countries around the world that are experiencing war, their GDP tends to suffer, because if you can get killed going out for a bottle of milk, you're not going to go. Now, internal is psychological. So if you've ever heard the president get on TV and say everything's okay with the economy, we're getting through this, what he's doing is he is trying to make you feel better about the economy. And if you feel better, you may spend more. So FDR did this with fireside chats during the Great Depression. It's an attempt to psychologically make people feel more comfortable and increase their consumption. Underconsumption is another reason for a recession. And so, for example, if we get so much better at making goods and services that we produce far more than we can consume, then we may not buy it. That could happen because wages don't keep pace, and so our output goes up, but the wages necessary to buy that may not go up. And that was one of the causes of the Great Recession, as we started to increase output with more productive means. The output went up, but the wages to buy the output did not go up. Under consumption. Changes in the business cycle have an unequal effect on the components of GDP. So, for example, when we look at goods, consumers, they buy goods, which are then divided into consumer goods and services. Then goods are divided into durable goods and non-durable goods. Well, changes in GDP, changes in output, have a greater impact on durable goods. Sandwiches, for example, you're going to buy the same amount during a recession or not, but if you are comfortable that the future of the economy is going to go well, you will spend more money on durable goods. And so it has a disproportionate impact there. And if you're afraid that the economy is heading south and there may be a recession in the future, you'll cut back on your durable goods, because by definition they can last longer than 3 years. You'll make that car last for a longer period of time instead of splurging on a new one. So changes in GDP will have a more dramatic effect on the durable goods sector. And that concludes our discussion of the business cycle.